Hey, what's going on guys? My name is Logan with West Desert Shooter, and in today's video, I'm gonna run us through how to install and make sure that our precision rifle scope is level. The main point of this video is actually to install my new F3R one-piece cantilever 34mm mount. These things are super solid and the machining quality is very high end. Now the actual cantilever portion of this scope mount is 2.15 inches forward of where the rail actually clamps onto. So what that helps you accomplish on something like an AR platform where you have a rail versus the upper receiver, you don't want to clamp on both surfaces. So with the cantilever you can mount to the upper receiver, which is more rigid. It's less likely to flex under load. So your cantilever can hang out over your rail and then it only mounts to one surface, which is the better way to mount your scope on an AR. All right guys, enough talking. Let's get into the details of how I mount my scope and make sure that it is level for my long range precision shots. Okay, so I've gone ahead and removed all the hardware off of my F3R mount, so I can remove these scope caps here. I did loosely install the bubble level on my Arken EP4 scope. There is a link below if you want to check these out. They are an awesome value. This one runs about 550 bucks, 34mm first focal plane, zero stop, all the good features. So on this mount, I did mock it up real quick on my AR-15. And before I removed this off my previous AR-15 upper it was on, I noticed that the rear objective of my scope hung out about 1/4 to 1/2 inch off the back end of my receiver. So that's kind of what I'm shooting for. When I was mocking this up, this does have one key to integrate into the Picatinny rail. And where I found that I liked it the most so I could get my scope positioned where I wanted it was towards the rear. So I'm actually going to engage this into the rear slot. Go ahead and push that forward, grab our T25 driver, and just kind of snug those up just to hold it on while we get our scope dropped in here. F3R does suggest getting everything snugged up on these rail screws on the rail clamps, and then go ahead and torque them to 25 inch-pounds. Now some of my favorite tools I use to install scopes is actually just a couple loose bubble levels like these. Go ahead and drop this on the top of the receiver. We'll find out where level is on the receiver. Now I always level off of the scope base or the receiver on my rifles, and then I go ahead and drop my scope in there. We're actually going to use a plumb bob to level this scope, and I'm going to show you why I prefer to use a plumb bob. A lot of people will just say, well, you can level off the scope turrets, that's good enough. But in reality, if you do that, if you just take your scope cap and rotate it 90 and check your level again, 90% of the time it's going to be off level again. So the scope caps themselves are not level surfaces. Now the F3R mounts do have little indentations on them to show you where they belong on the scope mount itself. Now I'm only really going to snug down 2 of the T25s to hold my scope in place so that we can take it out in the backyard and run it on a plumb bob. Now the reason we want to use a plumb bob is because the reticle in this should be perfectly vertical with the level of the scope. Now I did install a level here. Obviously it's not in level yet. We're going to tighten that up once we get it set up on the plumb bob. The reason you want to use a plumb bob is because the plumb bob goes directly in the direction of gravity. Now when you're shooting a precision rifle long range, your bullet is going to fall directly in line with gravity. So you want to make sure that you get your scope set up along the line of gravity so that when you're shooting, it adjusts and tracks correctly according to gravity. Okay, so we've got a good level on our receiver. The plumb bob is right in our view. Looks like the scope is canted. There we go. We just want to make sure that whole reticle is in line with the plumb bob. Go ahead and tighten that screw. Nice and easy. Snug the rear down. And then we're going to verify as we go. Okay, now we need to make sure that we get our bubble level leveled with the reticle and the scope as well. So let's go ahead and loosen this. So now if we level with the bubble on the scope, our reticle should fall dead in line with this plumb bob. We've got it. All right, so at this point, we're gonna go ahead and get these scope rings torqued down again with my Wheeler fat wrench. Now, just to recover what we did on the scope clamp rings, where the scope actually clamps onto the base, those go up to 25 inch-pounds, and then the scope cap rings are gonna be recommended at 16 inch-pounds. And that's typical what I've seen to most scope manufacturers. Because this one has such a large surface area, maybe also it has 6 pieces of hardware. Maybe that's why they went to 16. I have seen some up to 18, but you really don't want to exceed that. Once you clamp too hard, the mechanics within the scope actually are unable to move how they're supposed to. So be careful when torquing down your scope. We've got our Wheeler fat wrench set at 16 inch-pounds. Let's go ahead. I always start with the 2 center pieces. And then I do a star pattern from there. Now, one quick detail I do want to cover on the F3R scope mount is because I ran my bubble level, with this specific scope, I have plenty of room between where the turret bubble is on the scope body, and I can move the scope forward and back depending on what I needed, as well as underneath the scope. Because this is an 1.5 inch high mount, there's tons of room underneath the scope as well, so I could run a larger profile bubble level like this one I've got here. It's not super low pro, but it did fit in there, no problem at all. And you should be able to run just about any bubble level inside there if you need to. F3R also offers some accessory pieces that mount on the top of your scope rings if you want a small piece of Picatinny rail up there to mount a red dot or whatever type of accessory you want on top of your scope rings. Now that we've got all this torqued up, we are finally done here, guys. Well, all right, guys, that's how I install my precision rifle optics. I make sure that they are level and in line with gravity using a plumb bob. I go ahead and level off the top of the receiver. I tighten down my screws in a specific order so that I can still adjust the scope while I need to. And overall, it's worked out really awesome for me out in the field. I hope that some of these tips helped you out. Hopefully it introduced you to a few new items, maybe like Uintah Precision, F3R machine with their excellent scope mounts, or even Arken optics. They will all be linked below. Be sure to check out their websites if that's something you're interested in. I greatly appreciate your time, and we will see you guys in the next one.